11 when I first learnt about the climate crisis, and not long after, I declared to my parents over dinner that I wanted to become an activist. To be perfectly honest, I had no idea what that actually meant. I thought maybe it would be chaining myself to a tree or riding a zodiac into the path of a whaling ship. Naturally, my parents were not too excited about those options, and so I started to carve my own path as a storyteller and communicator. At 13, I made documentaries about endangered species. At 16, I was negotiating with policymakers at global climate meetings. And by 19, challenging leaders in boardrooms. 5 years ago, I started my organization, Force of Nature. And since then, we've gone on to help tens of thousands of young people turn their anxiety about the climate crisis into action. It has been a meteoric journey, and I have been incredibly privileged with the opportunities I've had with the platform I've gotten to build. If any of you follow me on Instagram or LinkedIn, you'll have seen me speaking on global stages, from interviewing the 14th Dalai Lama to addressing world leaders at COP26. Much like my peers, people like Greta Thunberg, Vanessa Nakate, Mitzi Janelle Tan, young climate leaders who are heralded as beacons of hope, who are celebrated for their eloquence, their heart, their ability to speak truth to power. And yet behind our social media profiles, as shiny and glossy as they may seem, there's a lot that you don't see. Like the time I was sobbing on the bathroom floor of a restaurant, unable to reconcile the headline I just read, 5 years left to save the planet, with the happy, smiling faces of the people eating outside. I felt angry, but also envious of their blissful ignorance. I didn't broadcast the time I checked myself into a Buddhist retreat after having a mental breakdown. For the first time, I'd been called out on social media, and not by climate trolls, which I was very familiar with, but by other activists. You see, I had been invited to speak at a conference attended by Tony Blair. And when I shared this on social media, I was bombarded with messages from other activists telling me I was complicit in war crimes, that I needed to be held accountable for my actions. One went so far as to tell me that I was a white supremacist by mere association. I didn't talk about the time that I stood on a stage like this one, addressing a room full of business leaders, sharing the latest climate science, only to be booed and heckled. About the conversation I had with my boyfriend afterward, tears streaming down my face, telling him I just can't do this anymore. That one's particularly fresh. It happened just 2 weeks ago. I haven't talked about the heated family arguments, about the number of dinner table conversations that have ended in tears over ideological differences. You don't hear about any of this stuff because you see a facade. And it's a facade many people seem only too happy to uphold, because youth activists are there to inspire us, to make us feel hopeful. 2023 was one of the hardest years of my life. Burnout crept up on me slowly and then all at once. And my longest healthy stretch was about 3 weeks when I wasn't wiped out with chest infections, a lost voice, or chronic pain. My body forced me to stop, and I knew I had to talk to someone, but it didn't really feel like my friends or family would get it. They would tell me to take a break, to take time off, as if activism were simply a 9 to 5. And so I turned to other activists, friends of mine working on issues ranging from education reform to racial justice to queer rights. And I asked them, how are you doing, really? And it was as if the floodgates opened. They told me their own stories of being called out by their peers, of family breakdown, of feeling alienated from their communities. And hearing their stories, For the first time, I felt a little bit less alone. I realized just how endemic these challenges are, but also how little they're talked about. Some of these friends I've known for years, and yet we had never spoken so openly about just how difficult this work can be. And so I asked them if they would be willing to share their stories on season 3 of the Force of Nature podcast, Confessions of a Climate Activist. And they very kindly indulged me. Over 9 episodes, we dived behind the scenes, from imposter syndrome to feeling like a bad activist to the ethical compromises of trying to make money. These conversations stirred something in me, but there was one in particular, actually the episode we launched just 2 days ago, with my friend Arifa. And she shared her own story of burnout, of what it felt like to drift further and further from her mission. Suddenly being unable to make simple decisions like what to have for lunch because of the decision fatigue of working on such huge and complex problems. She talked about the normalization of self-sacrifice within activism, and critically her turning point when she decided to stop and imagine what a life outside of activism could look like for her. Hearing Ari speak so openly and vulnerably allowed me to pause and imagine what it would look like for me to take a step back as well. And when I did, I realized that I hadn't been showing up for myself or showing up as the leader that Force of Nature needed for some time. And so at the end of 2023, I made the decision to step down as executive director in June of this year. It was an incredibly difficult decision, and yet it felt like a veritable weight lifted off my shoulders. Still, I was terrified of what my team would say, what my friends and family might think, and yet when I opened up to them, they could not have been more supportive. The making of this podcast showed me the changes that are needed within activism. The fact that we need to pay young people for their incredibly important work. The need for more accessible mental health support and conversations, and also the need to champion solidarity across generations and across movements as well. But more than anything, it showed me that there's no right way to be an activist, only that we can all start by being more open, honest, and human. After all, the world doesn't need 100 perfect activists, but millions of imperfect ones. Thank you.